Okay, hello, Facebook. Today we will be talking about domestic violence and relationships. But first, I would like to introduce our guests and people with us today. First, let's hear from Mr. Mike Coffey.
Hello, I am an LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a clinician at Sound Living Counseling Center. I've been working there since January. I work with men, children, couples, and families. So this is definitely a pertinent topic, in my opinion, especially with COVID going on, people being self-quarantined. I'm happy to give my perspective. I'm happy to listen to other people's perspective. I'm looking forward to the educational component as well as the discussion component. Um, I'm really happy to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Miss Natasha.
Hello, Facebook world. I'm Natasha Christian. I'm an intern at Sound Living Counseling Center. I'm coming to an end, which is bittersweet for me because I've enjoyed it. I've learned so much under Miss April, but hopefully all that information will just go further with me as I go on in my career. I am a school counseling major. I'm trying to get my master's in school counseling. So I'm thankful for being here. I'm also thankful, like Mike said, about getting that education and seeing how we can help further with domestic violence. Thank y'all for joining in. Don't forget to ask your questions on Facebook Live.
Thank you. My name is Ashley. I'm also an intern at Sound Living Counseling Center and working on my master's in clinical mental health counseling. And we will now hear from the leader of Sound Living, Miss April.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate you guys being here for this whole series. We talked about mental health. We talked about relationships. It's been fun. This is actually the last topic in our series, unless, of course, somebody comes up with some new topics that we need to talk about. But we're glad you're here today. So I'm April Taylor with Sound Living Counseling Center. I'll do a little more extensive introduction today. We've been doing Sound Living. This is our 10th year. Initially, I work with women, adolescents, families, marital and premarital. And then when I do couples, I have a co-counselor, Brad, that does couples with me. Prior to that, I worked for the Center of Excellence, and I did that for about 4 years. I worked with children, adolescents, and their families. And I say a team of doctors that put me through my paces med school style, meaning learned a lot, got the t-shirt, survived. But it was a great, amazing training. Like I got the best training available in Chattanooga, I think. So I was very grateful for that opportunity. We moved to Sound Living in 2016. We have we had 3 counselors. Now we have 5. We have 2 guys, Mike and Jay, and then we have 2 women, Jory and Jasmine. Mike and Jay do mostly men, some families, some couples. Jasmine and Jory do children, adolescents, and some young women. And then Jasmine also has a trauma piece that she does specifically. So together we kind of cover the whole family now. I've been married for 32 years to my husband, Jerome. We have 3 kids, 2 grandkids, and we're just passionate about helping people. So we're excited about this topic. This topic became necessary. This wasn't even something that I had planned to talk about. It wasn't one of the original topics. It's necessary because of what's going on with COVID. In my whole 10 years, I've seen the most domestic violence during this season. So I thought we just need to have this conversation. And I'll pitch it back to you, Miss Ashley. We can kind of talk a little bit before we come back to.
Okay. So I just want to start off with giving a quick definition of what domestic violence is. Domestic violence is intimate partner violence, and it's a pattern of behaviors that is used to gain control and power over another intimate partner. And it can be seen in different ways. There's different behaviors that can be seen in domestic violence, which is physical harm, arousing fear, preventing your partner from doing what they would like to do, forcing them, physical and sexual violence, threats and intimidation. There are a lot of different things that go into domestic violence.
That's good. Anybody else want to add anything to kind of what we're going to talk about today, or what domestic violence is, or just any kind of questions or comments about that before we get started?
Well, in terms of the control component, I think unfortunately the perpetrators are using COVID to their benefit. They know that there's a quarantine. So I think that power and control is heightened with the stay-at-home order. And that's something that I'd like to talk about and figure out how to come up with practical solutions on that level.
Okay, and that's a great point. And we're going to kind of talk about more of that when we get to the education part. But I definitely think COVID is definitely a factor, and how it's a factor and why it's a factor is definitely part of the conversation today. But that's a great question. What about you, Ms. Natasha? Any comments or questions?
No, ma'am. I'm sure I have some later though.
Okay, so we'll jump into the presentation and we'll try to address some of the questions that have been asked. I'm going to do a PowerPoint and we're going to kind of talk through. We may go through the slides pretty fast, or we may slow down if we need to. If you guys have questions on Facebook, please send the questions. My ladies are listening and they're going to try to make sure we get the questions so we can address them. And then Mike is here on purpose because I wanted my guys to be here so that they can help address some of the concerns from a male perspective. I do pretty well looking at it from a female perspective, but I don't have that male piece covered. So I always need my guys in the house to kind of help me with that. So, so as we run through this, be listening with that in mind, Mike.
Got it.
Okay, so we're going to talk about domestic violence. And I love how Ashley kind of gave us the definition already. Perfect definition. Also, Ashley, shout out for making a presentation for us. We appreciate that. Sound Living can't do anything without help. So my interns make me rock. They make me look good. They make all of us look good. So thank you for that. But as she said, it's violence against an intimate partner. It could be a married person or it could be a couple. It includes physical harm, arousing fear. She kind of defined it really well, so I don't have to go over all that. So those things are very important to kind of look at. And then who does it affect? Women, men, children, and families. So it affects everybody, not just women. And sometimes we kind of look at it from a just women perspective, but it's not, that wouldn't be fair to kind of look at it from just women. It affects all of us. It affects the entire family, which is one of the things that I try to make sure that we kind of talk about as well. There are different types of abuse. We talk about domestic abuse, so that's like a physical assault, things going on in the home, sexual abuse, demanding sex, rape inside of marriage or inside relationships, or even inside date rape is also a type of abuse. Financial abuse, not allowing women to spend, or vice versa. It could be, all of this can go both ways. I generally see women, so I generally look at it from a woman's perspective. Hence why I have Mike here to help me look at it from a male's perspective. But so most of the stuff I'm going to be looking at it from a female perspective. Psychological or emotional abuse. And we're going to look at a lot of that today when we talk about narcissism and gaslighting. That's a lot of psychological and emotional abuse. So we're going to address that as well. Discriminatory abuse. So that could be racial discrimination. There could be age discrimination. There are a lot of types of discrimination as well. So those things can be, and then there's organizational and institutional abuse. So those things can happen as well. And some of those things do affect the home. So stages of domestic violence, you've got the tension building stage. So it starts with, it can last a few months to a few hours. Like these things are kind of building up. People feel like they're walking on eggshells. I hear that a lot. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I don't know where to go or what to do next. And then there's the abusive incident, like what happens. So somebody gets hit, somebody gets hurt, somebody falls, somebody gets pushed, attacked. There's a physical incident, which leads to the honeymoon phase. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I don't want to leave. We can work this out. So that's the honeymoon phase. And then that cycle kind of continues. So we kind of go in and out of that cycle. But the bottom line is, in most cases, the abusers doesn't change and it just continues. So those are kind of the stages. So what is emotional abuse? That's when the behavior isn't physical. So we're doing stuff, we're not touching you, we're not affecting you physically, but we're saying things. There's verbal abuse, manipulation, intimidation, humiliation. So we're threatened, possibly making people feel like they're less than or not as good as. A couple of those types of abuse are gaslighting and narcissism. And gaslighting kind of falls under narcissism to me. We're going to talk about it first in this case, but it really is one of those things that makes things kind of a lot worse. But there's a lot of emotional abuse going on, name calling, belittling, making people feel not so bright or not smart. There's a lot of things that are kind of happening with emotional abuse. So what is gaslighting? I'm gonna go back and define narcissism first. Let me kind of skip. So let's talk about what is narcissism, and we'll come back to what is gaslighting. So narcissism, because that's the bigger category. The narcissist is who performs the gaslighting. So let's talk about what the narcissism is first. It's seen in grandiose behavior, a sense of superiority. I'm better, I'm more important. They lack empathy, a sense of entitlement. They desire praise and admiration. And it happens kind of over and over again. So people kind of feel like it's all about me and everything has to be about them. And there's nothing that we're going to adjust. Like it's got to be this way or the highway. So there's a lot of entitlement involved too. So you have to do this because I'm entitled to you to treat me this way. They often require excessive amounts of admiration. This is what a narcissist looks like. Controlling. And when we say controlling, a lot of us are controlling. I've been controlling before too, but it's excessively controlling. Like not really understanding that the only person we can control is ourselves. But not only is it that, but it's controlling the other person, not allowing the other person to make decisions or to think or to decide for themselves. The narcissist lacks empathy. They don't know what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes. They don't know what it's like to feel like the other person feel. They don't consider the other person's feelings or thoughts. They just lack empathy, no sense of empathy at all. And then neglecting the needs of the partner. Because it's all about me, then they don't consider what the other person needs or what could possibly be a need of the other person. Go ahead.
On Facebook, Miss Donna was saying that the control can be gained in very subtle ways.
Absolutely. And I love that. And that's why we're going to kind of talk about gaslighting. That's one of those subtle ways. So that's exactly true. So a lot of times I described it today like a boiling pot. You're in the pot and the water is cold and you don't notice anything. And the temperature keeps increasing. And so that's what kind of living with a narcissist is like. It's subtle, it starts small, but it keeps increasing. And the longer you stay there, the more you realize, oh, I'm in this situation, but now it's too hot and I can't get out. So it's kind of subtle in that way, Ms. Donna. That's kind of how I describe it. So what is gaslighting? This is kind of one of those topics that a lot of people are talking about. I've been on presentations before where people talk about gaslighting, and I don't necessarily go there. I haven't gone there about domestic violence or narcissism or gaslighting before. I feel kind of guilty about it because it's always been out there, but I promise you it's increasing because of COVID. It's a lot more So gaslighting is when a person makes an individual question their reality in order to gain power. So it's a technique in abusive relationships that's manipulative. So the idea is that it makes the person feel like they're losing their mind, or they don't know what's going on. It's subtle. It's kind of cold. Like if I say something happened, well, that didn't really happen. Or if I say something happened to me, well, that didn't happen to me. Or they'll flip it back and say, whatever you said happened to you happened to them. Or whatever happened because of you. Like if they did something, then it's my fault. So that those are some subtle ways that gaslighting is used, but it's often a off-putting thing to make you feel to unarm you. So if you're doing something to me and I tell you you're doing something to me, then you tell me that it's my fault that you're doing it to me. You're doing it to me because I did it, or because that's something that, so it's my fault that it's happening. And so that's what gaslighting kind of is. And then these are some signs. The person is lying to you. They're trying to turn all your friends and family against you. So that it's very isolating. Abuse is very isolating anyway, but when you're living with a narcissistic person, it's more isolating because one, it's all about him. And two, if you get around your friends and family, you'll be able to discuss this stuff and realize it's not normal. But if I keep you away from everybody, then you don't realize it and you don't get to have that conversation. They shift the blame from themselves onto others. So if they're doing something, if they're having an affair, you must be having an affair. If they're cheating or looking or talking on the phone, then they're checking your phone to see what you're doing. And so it's always like the opposite. It is very unarming. They're denying that they ever did anything wrong. So they rarely apologize, rarely accept responsibility, and rarely say they did something. They use compliments to keep you in the relationship. So it's kind of a subtle way. So they remember back to the honeymoon phase. They'll go back to the honeymoon phase and remind you, oh, you're so great, you're so wonderful. You know, I need you here. You're super. After I call you stupid or hit you or do something other that's demeaning. Trying to twist the conversation in advance. And that happens just so often, just twisting what you said versus what somebody else said. So, you know, I said this, but then they twist it to mean something else and put other words in terms of that. So it's very kind of important to understand what gaslighting is. I'm going to stop there to let's talk about it, and then we'll come back to some statistics on it. Comments about that so far?
So I had a comment about who domestic violence affects. So, like you were saying, we mainly see it in women. And when we look at the statistics, it basically go off of what is being reported if there's a domestic violence case. A lot of the times, the main people or the main population that does report domestic violence is women. And with men, you rarely hear a report of domestic violence, but it does happen. And it can affect families, it can affect the children if they're seeing it, if the abuse goes over onto them. Domestic violence affects the whole entire family, and it goes in this cycle from tension to action to honeymoon phase. Unless you're able to stop it, it continues in this cycle.
Absolutely. And so you have children, male children who grow up seeing it. And then it affects the men because it affects their jobs. It affects them going to prison and going to jail. It affects them if they're abused. What you didn't say, but kind of implied, is that sometimes domestic violence is the other way around. And then men are violated, but they may not report because they may be embarrassed to report. So that we don't know the actual statistics regarding that. So that's definitely, and we also have women who fight and who initiate some of the exchanges. And so those numbers aren't usually kept as well. Like if the woman initiated it, or if it was like a fight versus him assaulting her for no reason. I mean, it's kind of a different thing, but we don't address that as much. So I do want to bring up those two situations.
So something that we kind of talked about a little bit, but not directly, is intergenerational abuse, where I've worked with families where literally it was, well, my dad hit. I mean, as simple as, well, my dad hit me, and I turned out okay, and I can hit my son, to except to severe sexual abuse, where it's just like that is the norm. And in terms of a manipulation, that you're talking about maybe more than three generations of families who are reinforcing that it's okay. And that if there was a different perspective, they would look like you're talking from the moon, that it is so far out that so they have normalized their behavior to such an extent, which it's like kind of having a poker face, but still thinking that this is so not in reality. And that it's like changing the Titanic times a million. Like, just the principle of getting it into this man's mind that, like, it's not right. It's like I'm thirsty, so I drink a glass of water. Well, I have a hard day, so I beat on my wife. It literally is the same thing. And it's like, just from my perspective, that there's like grooming, and so that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, you made me think of another thing that you kind of talked when you say intergenerational. You made me think of two things. One is that I think it's going on in the church as well. So not just, it's inside the church and outside the church. And so we need to really be having this conversation. What does it look like? How do we support people? How do we figure out how to get out of this situation? Because, not only just because you go to church, I mean, you didn't grow up seeing it. I guess is what made me think of the church thing. The other thing that's kind of cool about the intergenerational thing is the reason why I haven't talked about it much, and that it's not it is a big part of sound living, but it's not an everyday. Before now, it wasn't an everyday part of sound living, is because my experience was that my mom was abused when I was a child, and I was very young. I was 7, and I can remember her being abused. So from that point forward, I don't think that there wasn't a lot. There were a few more incidences, but it wasn't like what she had went through when I was 7 and younger. And I just decided, hey, I'm never going to be abused. If you hit me, I will kill you, like literally. And then my husband said, well, if you keep your hands to yourself, girl, I don't think you'll have to just worry about it. So for 32 years, I've kept my hands to myself, and he hadn't hit me and I hadn't hit him. So that's our story. But that's not every woman's story. And so we have to address it. Just because we broke the curse, praise the Lord, doesn't mean that everybody has broken the curse. And so it still has to be addressed. So I just want to kind of put that out there, that there are ways to stop it, and some of it starts with us. But also that we have to be sensitive to women who are in the situation and who don't have a husband who won't hit, and who haven't decided that they won't hit. It still has to be addressed. So that's kind of why we're talking about it too. Other comments before I go to the stats?
That men not reporting abuse is true. That not only is there a stigma of embarrassment, but I find that, I lived in Seattle for 14 years before I came here, and the stigma of a mental health treatment therapy in the South is a lot higher than in other parts of the country. So not only are men embarrassed, but like they're expected to go talk to a stranger about their abuse. That's not normal. That's not manly. So that really does need to be taken into account.
Do you think that's also a factor with men not seeking help for domestic violence? So maybe men are perpetrators of domestic violence, but they know they're in trouble, but they won't seek help. Is that kind of the same factor, or help us understand that?
It's the same, but the different side of the coin. So it's like it's crazy to rationalize and normalize being a perpetrator of domestic abuse, but if they were in therapy and they got any opposition or any correction, they know that's coming, and they know that they're not going to listen to that. So it's beyond stigma. It takes their power away. It sheds light. It gives reality to the abuse. Whereas in gaslighting, and I have seen women who literally was walking like a bruise, but justify it. And so so theoretically, if the couple were in there and the guy were to use gaslighting in a therapy session, like that's not going to fly. Like you can't normalize abuse in therapy, and that's, in my opinion, the reason why a lot of perpetrators discourage, well, don't want to go themselves, but discourage their spouses to get into therapy because it's like a lifeline, and he doesn't want
I got you.
those women to have that. So that's my answer to that.
And Miss April, we do have a question on
Yes.
Facebook. Ms. Zoe said, is there resources for women who are only experiencing the emotional abuse part of domestic violence?
So yes, and we're going to talk about the resources. As we talk about the definition, we're about to talk about some resources available, and we're going to address those. And those resources are available, whether it's physical or emotional, whether it's mental, it's sexual, no matter what the abuse is, the resources are available, and they do a great job of handling those situations. So yes, we will definitely address that. Other questions before I jump back into it? Comments? Y'all good? Y'all rocking and rolling. Thank you. So let's look at the statistics. So research and statistics from the National Domestic Violence Hotline talk about nearly 29% of women and 10% of men in the U.S. have experienced some kind of physical violence, rape, or stalking by their partner. 35.6% of women and 28.5% of men have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking. And nearly half of all women and men in the U.S. have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner in their lifetime. That's a lot of people, y'all. And we didn't do the numbers by COVID. I don't know if we can kind of go back and do some research on that from since COVID started. But I had already heard that because of COVID, we would have an increase in domestic violence and in child abuse. And I heard it and I kind of dismissed it. But when I tell you, since I've been doing this for 10 years, I've seen way more since March than I've seen in the whole 10 years. I'm just shocked. And that's why we're talking about it, because it's so important and we've got to address it.
I do have a comment about that.
Yes.
Another thing that I have seen from the National Domestic Violence Hotline is that since COVID has started and they feel that since people have been quarantining and people that have been in those situations since they are in the home right now during quarantine and they're not able to go out, go places, that could increase the abuse as well and probably create different ways that they could be abused in that situation.
And so that makes sense to kind of realize that that's kind of what's going on and why there's an increase. And I appreciate that input because it's staggering to me just to see it kind of unfold. I didn't expect it to happen at Sound Living, I guess you could say. Yeah, there's going to be more numbers. But no, I didn't expect it to be here. So now that it's here at home, it's kind of okay, we've got to address it. And again, we've had Sound Living, we've had domestic violence here over the years, and we addressed it. And we're going to talk about how we address it as I jump back into the presentation. So let's look at, let's go back to here again. So we talked about the stats. So how can clients get out of this situation? What can we do about it? If you're planning to leave, you want to call 911. A domestic violence hotline is so important because they're going to help you with a plan. One of the things at Sound Living is we do try to address a plan and we do try to help you with a plan, but we also partner with other agencies in the community. And that's kind of the next slide, but we partner with people like Partnership in our area. So I will send you, if you tell me you're in a domestic violence situation, I will send you to Partnership and have you work on that domestic violence. And then we come back to Sound Living and we work on the marriage and we work on the relationship and some of the other things. I also help you with the mental health and the journaling and the abuse and everything else that's going on. But we definitely partner with partnership. And the reason we do that, I want to be very specific about that. Partnership specializes in domestic abuse. That includes the emotional abuse or sexual abuse. So they specialize in it. They do a lot of teaching on it. They spend a lot of time with it. It's what they do. They also have shelters and places for you to go. And then they specialize in the plan. They partner with the police. The whole way it's set up is addressed to address this situation. So because there's somebody in the community who is set up to address it, I partner with them and let them address what they do well. And I've always figured that out. Like I do certain things, but I let whoever does something else better than I do, I let them do that. So that's kind of why we partner with somebody else with domestic violence. If they show a sign of gaslighting, you know, you've got to distance yourself and cut ties. But the thing about it, and I like for marriages to work. Okay, this still didn't change it up. We want it to work if it could, but you got to be safe. So we really want to be safe, go through the program, learn everything you need to learn. If you can work it out after you and your partner, because sometimes they have programs where the partner can go through this program and learn as well, then we can help work on the marriage. But we don't want to have you in an abusive, unsafe situation. And they talk about if there's narcissism, proceed with caution. The gaslighting is so dangerous that, you know, they talk about cutting ties. Then how can counselors help? We can be a listening ear. We can understand the situation and remind them that it wasn't their fault. We can walk through mental and emotional damage. So teaching them the journal, teaching them the self-care, teaching them to process their emotions and what's kind of going on with them, teaching them to write about it, whatever they need to do to help them feel better, helping them learn to control their emotions. We can be an advocate for them. When I send somebody to partnership, I'm advocating for them. When I send a letter to the court, I don't generally go to court, but if I send a letter to the court, I can do that as a place of advocacy as well. Then you've got local resources, including support groups, shelters, organizations. Shout out to Keosha Brewster. She's doing some work on domestic violence. Keosha, if you see me, feel free to share this. She's doing a bravery brunch coming up in October. So go into something like that so you can learn more about domestic violence and address it directly. She also does some stuff with teenagers. I love the fact that she's addressing it early on so that teenagers now know what it is before they get into that situation. You can read articles, and then of course there are other resources regarding domestic violence. So who's working effectively with clients? So we can ask about the risk. We talked about creating a safety plan, other ways to kind of work with clients, be knowledgeable. I love psychoeducational. So doing stuff like this where we teach clients that this is not okay. There are ways to address it and what we need to do. And then understand the other systems that are involved, understand the court systems, GCS, helping them work through all those things and becoming an advocate through those systems as well. And then what are some resources? You've got the Domestic Violence Hotline, the Tennessee Coalition for Domestic Violence and Sexual Abuse, Partnership, that's the agency I mentioned in Chattanooga that we partner with. They do a great job. We send clients there, they take good care of them. Sometimes they come back, we still work through the marriage. Sometimes it doesn't work out and they get a divorce. But we try to, make sure we address and make sure and sometimes clients go to the shelter and get safe and make sure that happens. There's Family Promise. Then there's a coalition against domestic violence. And then there are also domestic shelters. So there are a lot of resources available. So part of the reason why we're having this conversation today is because we want you to know that there are resources available and that you don't have to do this alone and that there are places that can help. So questions or comments about that?
One statistic I've noticed, and this is nationally, that the suicide, the suicide rate has increased dramatically since COVID start and with cases of domestic violence and educating people, giving them the suicide hotline number, and just giving them other options is crucial. And this is almost a pandemic unto itself.
And so, speaking of suicide, we actually did a whole presentation on grief, and we addressed suicide. We did one on mental health and anxiety as well, and we addressed suicide on that one as well. So yes, that is very important. The suicide hotline is important. If somebody's got the number and want to call it out, that'll be fine. But yes, we're all about addressing those issues as well. We just kind of did them in separate presentations. So this one was specifically for domestic violence, but we've kind of addressed the suicide one in a couple of different. We even had a friend that give a testimony about suicide, and so we addressed it in that particular one. Any other questions on Facebook?
No, ma'am, not so far.
Do you guys have any comments or questions or anything we need to address?
I just wanted to make one quick comment on a safety plan that I actually worked on when I was doing in-home family therapy. So I'm literally witnessing, like, this is the woman, this is how I ran away from him. And we actually, oh man, it's been a long time, but we got put a bunch of clothes in a backpack, had a kind of a weekly contribution of money, so that there was a couple of nights hotel payment. Just the kind of the practicalities that if it gets that far, we talked about safety plans briefly, but actually putting something together. And I mean, this is what I brought up COVID is it's a little more difficult now, but actually having a realistic, real plan of escape. If you need to get out of there, you're not just running with no money, no clothes, no plan. So that's something that I actually have worked with with the family.
So and thank you for mentioning that. That's one of the reasons why we encourage people to come to counseling, because we help you develop a plan. We also encourage you to go to partnership because they help you develop a plan that also has shelters and everything else involved to kind of help you have somewhere safe to go when you do run. So those are some of the things that you can kind of work out with a counselor to kind of help you kind of work through those details. So those are definitely some things that we address. Anything about gaslighting or narcissism or comments or anything about that?
I think that it is important that people are educated about what is narcissism and what is gaslighting, because you never know when you're in this situation. You might think, oh, my partner is doing this. It's just how they are. I've dealt with this forever. But then you look at it and you realize, oh, this is gaslighting, or this is not normal behavior. And to know the signs and what to look out for and how to deal with these situations is helpful for people in these domestic violence situations, to know the signs, to be able to realize that their way they're being treated is not okay, and it's not normal, and it's not their fault that they're being treated this way.
And that is so, so important. That's one of the main reasons why we had this conversation today too, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of these terms. They're not familiar with them. They haven't addressed them. And I want to challenge the guys. I want somebody having this conversation with men. Like, it's not okay to hit women. It's not okay to mistreat women. It's not okay to gaslight or be narcissistic. Or if you're doing those things and you see those things, then it needs to be addressed. Churches, I want to challenge the churches to address it, to not let it just keep going on and act like it's normal. I also want to challenge women about hitting men. We do it. It's so prevalent. And not only do we hit men, we also provoke men to hit us. We do things that on purpose. Now, this is a different conversation, but I'm going to have it while we're talking about domestic violence. On purpose, we do things to get them to hit us so they can go to jail, or so they can get consequences, and that's not okay. We've got to hold women accountable as well. If we want people to hold men accountable, we also have to hold women accountable. And I do that at Sound Living. Oh my goodness, on a regular. I'm holding a lot of women accountable to a lot of stuff. And they want to know who's holding the men accountable. Who's calling them out? Who's telling them to stop it? Who's telling them this is not okay? Who's addressing this to the men? who's having small groups with men who have abuse problems, um, controlling problems, who's addressing those issues. And so, challenge. If you are, reach out to me. I'll be happy to have a conversation with you. We need to address it. I know my guys at Sound Living are. I'm very proud to have Jay and Mike, and I know they do it. But I don't think it's enough to have my two guys. I think we need more people out there. We need, again, churches, pastors, other people addressing it. People who are in relation to men, who men respect, who can address this to men, because I can't address it to men. I mean, I try, and Brad and I do the best we can, but it really, and Brad does a good job. He addresses it as well. And, if we got a couple and there's domestic violence, we do address it. But I'm saying somebody who have men taken to the side and have a group of men or individual men and saying, this is not okay. If this is happening, this is not okay. And again, we definitely have to address it with women as well. And I hold all my girls accountable. They know it. They love me, but I hold them accountable. Other thoughts about that?
I like what you said about having the conversations with the men about what is okay, about them being abused as well, and informing and educating them about that as well. Also, about the churches being informed and spreading that knowledge as well. Because in a lot of situations where a client may be a part of a church, they'll most likely want to go to their someone in their church, a church pastor, about their situation first before seeking counseling. So I think it is good to have that education, have that information for them, even in the church or in the community.
Absolutely. And shout out to the pastors and churches. If you guys want to have this conversation with us and have us come out, or we can have a virtual conversation with a bunch of pastors, we'd be happy to do that. We'd love to inform you and empower you to be able to help your congregation with this issue. Other comments?
To piggyback on men confessing and disclosing that, the more, if let's say in a group, a man discloses I've been abused, it encourages other men to do the same. And pretty soon you've got, half the group kind of coming forward and saying, yeah, this did happen to me. It's like, row of dominoes. And so, and then like in the church, that if there's the possible, I've actually, like, kind of a long story, but make short, I've heard a pastor give a sermon on mental health. And so if you can find leaders who can give information that's personal, that it again encourages other men to come forward, that men are really wanting not to go forward with this. It's embarrassing, it's shameful, but to have one or two leaders to disclose, it's like it's an opportunity for more men to talk about their experience.
So you're encouraging me to, when I finish this presentation, we're going to tag our pastors and see, can we have some pastors maybe join the conversation? I'd be willing to have it again, or have them use this tape to encourage their parishioners to talk about this conversation, because it's needed. And like I said, with COVID, it's so much worse. So we've got to address it. We can't just ignore it. And so, and again, shout out to you, Miss Ashley, for hosting today, but also for doing the PowerPoint and pulling the documentation together for us. Excellent information. Of course, I didn't put the last slide, but there's a resource slide that tells us where we got all the information as well. But thank you for doing that, because it takes a lot of work to pull a conversation like this together. So we appreciate the background work. I try not to let that slide. You guys are, y'all make me look good. That's all I'm gonna say. That's good stuff. Anything else about, and we can talk about anything. We'll open it back up to any topic. I know we were talking about domestic violence, but anything else we need to talk about with counseling, or men or women or families?
I know this is completely not what we're talking about, but after we're done with the recording and broadcasting to Facebook, I have a technical question about, I've got a PowerPoint set up for my presentation Friday, and for some reason my Zoom doesn't work on my computer, but it works on my phone. So I'm just looking at ways that I can put my PowerPoint onto my phone and like the nuts and bolts in that. I don't know if
I know how to do that, and I'll be happy to show you.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. We can have a sidebar when we finish.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
I have one comment on the slide in the section where it says effective things for counselors to do for clients. The little link is a little PDF that talks about how counselors can work with clients on domestic violence.
So let me click on that real quick and see if we need to address that. I might could go back real quick. We got just a second, I think. So it's not the resources one, right? It's the one before that.
Yes.
This one?
Yes.
And so if I need to make this presentation available to anyone, let us know. We can kind of get this to you so you can kind of reach out to us. So that's a great resource. Thank you, Miss Ashley, for making sure we know what's out there. It's got COVID resources too, which is kind of interesting, which is kind of cool. So especially any counselors that are out there and you need this information, just let me know. I'll be happy to send it out. Thank you for letting me know that was out there, Miss Ashley. See what good work y'all doing. Anything else, Miss Latasha, you good?
I'm good. I'm just here to learn today, and I have learned quite a bit, especially about gaslighting and narcissism. It's just things, red flags to look out for. So no, I am good. Feel educated now on the topic.
Okay. So you good, Mike?
I'm good. Thank you for including me. I'm glad that I had the time to do this. This is great.
We're glad you can kind of hang out with us. And again, I'll tag some pastors or something, and hopefully they'll make it fly. Maybe some other counselors that I are associated with as well. All right. Well, Miss Ashley, I'll let you take us out.
Thank you everyone on Facebook for coming and watching our live today. Thank you for everyone that joined, and we will see hopefully in the future with another topic that comes to us. Have a nice day and feel blessed.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.